Subscribe to Storylab. Now let's begin. The voicemail came through at 0347 hours. Craig Green was already awake in his quarters at Fort Bragg, running through mission parameters for an operation in Yemen that would never happen. His phone screen lit up the darkness. Dad displayed across the caller ID, but the voice that followed wasn't his father's. This is Officer Catherine Dyer with the Portland Police Bureau. I need you to call me back immediately regarding Norman Green. It's urgent. Craig's hand moved to dial before his conscious mind processed the weight in her voice. She answered on the first ring. Mr. Green, Commander Green. What happened? The pause that followed told him everything. I'm sorry to inform you that your father was found deceased at approximately 11 p.m. last night. He was another pause. He was the victim of an assault near the Veterans Memorial Park. Craig stood perfectly still, the way he'd been trained to do when absorbing tactical information under duress. Details. Perhaps it would be better if. Details, Officer Dyer. She exhaled. 5 suspects. They beat him. Severely. There's video evidence they recorded themselves. Commander Green, I think you should know that your father, he was calling for someone named Margaret as he. Craig ended the call. His mother Margaret had died 3 years ago from cancer. His father Norman had visited her grave every single morning since, rain or shine, speaking to her like she was still there. The old man had buried half his platoon in Korea and watched his best friend die in his arms at Pork Chop Hill. But losing Margaret had broken something in him that even war couldn't touch. Craig packed a single bag in under 2 minutes, the way he'd done 1,000 times before deployments. But this time, he wasn't deploying. He was going home. The flight to Portland gave him 8 hours to think. He didn't spend them grieving. That would come later, in whatever brief moments he could steal from the mission ahead. Right now, he needed to compartmentalize. His father had taught him that. How to take the worst pain and lock it away in a box so it couldn't compromise the operation. Norman Green had earned a Bronze Star and Purple Heart doing exactly that after watching his lieutenant's head explode 3 feet away from him during a Chinese assault. Craig pulled up his father's last text message, sent 2 days ago. Found a stray cat by your mother's grave. Named her Liberty. She's got your mother's attitude. Come visit when you can. Love you, son. The phone felt heavier in his hand than any weapon he'd ever carried. Catherine Dyer met him at the precinct, a woman in her late 30s with tired eyes that had seen too much cruelty. She led him to a windowless conference room and set a tablet on the table between them. Before I show you this, Commander Green, I need you to understand that we have the suspects in custody. All 5 of them. They were caught within hours because they were stupid enough to post the video on social media. The DA is preparing charges right now. Show me. She hesitated, then pressed play. The video quality was sharp. Modern phones could capture atrocities in high definition. His father appeared in frame, walking slowly with the cane he'd needed since his hip surgery last year. The old man wore his Korean War veteran's cap, the one he never left home without. Then the first punch came from behind. Norman stumbled, but didn't fall. The camera swung around, showing 5 young men in their 20s, all wearing the same red bandanas. Gang colors. They were laughing. Craig watched without expression as they circled his father like wolves. One of them, tall, heavily tattooed, clearly the leader, shoved Norman to the ground. The old man tried to stand, using his cane for leverage, and that's when they really started. The beating lasted 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Craig counted every second. His father cried out for Margaret 7 times. Called for help 11 times. Begged them to stop 19 times. At the 3-minute mark, one of them said, "Die already, old man. You're boring us." Another laughed. "Tough old bastard. He just won't quit." The leader kicked Norman in the ribs, and Craig heard them crack through the phone speaker. That's what I hate about old people. They take forever to do anything. His father stopped moving at 4 minutes and 12 seconds. They kept filming for another 25 seconds, zooming in on his face, before walking away, laughing about getting food. The video ended. Catherine Dyer was watching Craig carefully, probably expecting tears or rage or breakdown. She got none of those things. "Their names," Craig said quietly. She slid a folder across the table. Marcus Knox, 26, the leader. He's got priors for assault, robbery, weapons charges. Did 2 years in Salem, but learned nothing. Raul Costello, 24, his lieutenant. Mario Dorsey, 23. Ignacio Haney, 25. Wade Boyd, 22. They call themselves the Red Fists. Small-time gang, mostly dealing drugs and causing trouble in the northeast neighborhoods. Craig memorized each face as he flipped through the photos. Marcus Knox stared at the camera with dead eyes and a smirk that said he'd never faced real consequences for anything he'd done. The others looked like followers, dangerous but directionless without Knox calling the shots. They're being arraigned tomorrow morning, Catherine continued. The DA is pushing for murder one on all of them. With the video evidence and their records, he's confident about convictions. What's their bail likely to be? She frowned. High. Very high. But Knox has family money from his mother's side. She owns 3 pawn shops and a used car lot. She's bailed him out before. And the others? Costello might make bail through his crew's pooled resources. The other 3? They'll stay locked up. Craig closed the folder. I need to see my father. The morgue was clinical and cold, exactly what it needed to be. Norman Green lay on a steel table covered by a white sheet. Catherine had offered to stay outside, but Craig had waved her off. He needed this moment alone. He pulled back the sheet and looked at what they'd done. His father's face was barely recognizable, swollen and purple with massive contusions. Both eyes were blackened shut. His jaw sat at an unnatural angle. Craig counted 14 visible impact points on his skull alone. This wasn't just a beating. This was torture. They'd enjoyed it. Craig placed his hand on his father's cold forehead, the way Norman used to do when Craig was sick as a child. I'm sorry, Dad. I should have been here. Should have made you move closer to base after Mom died. Should have done a lot of things. His father's words echoed in his memory from when Craig had joined the military at 18. The world needs men who stand between the wolves and the sheep. You're going to be one of those men, son. It's a hard path. Lonely sometimes, but necessary. Craig had stood between wolves and sheep for 20 years now. He'd hunted terrorists through Afghan mountains and cleared buildings in Fallujah. He'd planned operations that had neutralized high-value targets across 3 continents. He'd been called the Butcher of Ramadi by his enemies and the Ghost by his own men because he moved through hostile territory like smoke. But he hadn't been here when his father needed him most. I'm going to fix this, Craig said softly. Not the way they think. Not the way the system thinks. The way you would have wanted. The right way. He pulled the sheet back up and walked out. The funeral was 3 days later. Craig had expected a small affair. His father had outlived most of his friends. Instead, over 200 people showed up. Veterans from every war since Korea. Neighbors from his father's street. The mailman who delivered to his route for 15 years. The young waitress from the diner where Norman ate breakfast every Sunday. Catherine Dyer attended in civilian clothes, standing at the back. She approached Craig after the service while others were filing past the casket. I didn't know your father, she said, but I've spent the last 3 days interviewing people who did. Every single one of them had a story about how he helped them. Fixed a neighbor's car. Paid for a struggling family's groceries. Tutored kids in math for free. Stopped a mugging once when he was 75 years old. That sounds like him. The thing is, Commander Green, I've been a cop for 14 years. I've seen a lot of victims, and I've seen a lot of families of victims. I can usually tell when someone's going to try to take justice into their own hands. She looked at him directly. Don't. Please. Let the system work. I know it's slow and imperfect, but we've got them dead to rights. They'll go away for life. Craig met her eyes. Officer Dyer, I appreciate your concern, but I'm a soldier, not a vigilante. I follow orders and obey the law. I'll let the system handle this. She studied him for a long moment, clearly not convinced, but nodded. Okay, I'm going to hold you to that. And Commander, I'm sorry for your loss. Your father was clearly an exceptional man. After she left, Craig stood alone by the casket. His father wore his uniform, the one he kept pressed and ready in his closet for 60 years. The Bronze Star and Purple Heart were pinned to his chest, along with his other ribbons and decorations. An elderly man approached, leaning heavily on a walker. He wore a Korean War veteran's cap, identical to Norman's. "You're Craig," the man said. "I'm Jackie Russell. Served with your dad in Korea. We were in the same foxhole at Pork Chop Hill." Craig shook his hand carefully. "He talked about you. Said you saved his life." Jackie waved it off. "We saved each other. That's what brothers do." His eyes got distant. "Your dad was the bravest man I ever knew. Not because he wasn't afraid. We were all terrified, but because he never let fear stop him from doing what needed doing. After Lieutenant Morrison got killed, your dad took charge even though he was just a corporal. Led us through a Chinese counterattack that should have wiped us out. Lost good men that day, but we'd have lost everyone if Norman hadn't kept his head." "I didn't know that story. Your dad didn't talk much about the war. Too painful. But I'll tell you what he told me once, after it was all over. He said, the hardest thing about being a soldier isn't the fighting. It's coming home and pretending the world still makes sense." Jackie looked at the casket. "He did that, though. Made a life. Raised a good son. Loved your mother like she was the only woman on earth. That's harder than any battle." Craig felt something crack in the box where he'd locked his grief. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Russell." "Jackie and Craig, those boys who did this, the system better handle them right. Because if it doesn't..." He paused, and Craig saw a flash of the young soldier who'd survived Pork Chop Hill. "Well, the world's got a way of balancing the scales eventually." The arraignment happened the next morning. Craig sat in the gallery wearing his dress uniform, knowing the optics mattered. He wanted the judge to see who Norman Green's son was. Wanted the defendants to see it too. Marcus Knox and Raul Costello walked in wearing street clothes, clearly having made bail overnight. The other three wore orange jumpsuits, unable to scrape together the funds. Knox saw Craig and smirked, whispering something to Costello that made them both laugh. The judge, a stern woman named Joanna Dawson, was not amused by anything. She read the charges with barely contained disgust. The state of Oregon versus Marcus Knox, Raul Costello, Mario Dorsey, Ignacio Haney, and Wade Boyd. Charges include murder in the first degree, aggravated assault, and hate crime enhancements based on the victim's age and veteran status. The defense attorneys, public defenders for three of them, a slick private lawyer for Knox, entered not guilty pleas. The prosecutor, Aaron Tompkins, argued for remand without bail based on the severity of the crime and the video evidence. Judge Dawson considered, "Mr. Knox and Mr. Costello, your bail is revoked effective immediately. The video evidence presented suggests extreme danger to the community and absolute disregard for human life. All five defendants will be held without bail pending trial." Knox's smirk vanished. He started to argue, but his lawyer grabbed his arm. The bailiffs moved in to take them into custody, and Knox's eyes found Craig again. This time, there was no laughter, just cold recognition. The trial date was set for 4 months out. Craig left the courthouse and drove directly to his father's house, a small ranch-style home in a quiet neighborhood. The key was where it had always been, under the ceramic frog by the front door. His mother had put it there 30 years ago, and Norman had never moved it. Inside, everything was exactly as his father had left it. Coffee cup in the sink from that last morning. Reading glasses on the side table next to his chair. A book about World War II naval battles marked halfway through. And on the mantle, dozens of photos. Margaret Green smiling on her wedding day. Craig in his uniform at his commissioning ceremony. Family photos spanning decades. A gray cat meowed from the kitchen. Liberty, the stray his father had mentioned. Craig fed her, then sat in his father's chair and allowed himself 10 minutes to grieve properly. He cried silently, the way soldiers learn to cry, and then he stopped. He had work to do. Craig spent the next week getting his affairs in order. He requested an extended leave from his command, citing family emergency. His commanding officer, a 3-star general who'd known Norman Green personally, approved it without question. "Take whatever time you need," the general said. "And Craig, your father was one of the finest men I ever met. If there's anything you need, you call me." "Thank you, sir." Next, he contacted Russell A. Bear, his second-in-command and the man he trusted most in the world. Russell had served under Craig for 8 years, from Iraq to Afghanistan to Syria. He was a master sergeant, expert in close quarters combat and intelligence gathering. More importantly, he was loyal to the bone. "I heard about your father," Russell said when he answered. "I'm sorry, boss. What do you need? How much leave do you have saved up?" "Enough." "What?" "I need you in Portland." "Can't explain over the phone." Russell didn't hesitate. "I'll be there tomorrow." Craig's next call was to his father's lawyer, an old family friend named Kenneth Payne. Kenneth helped him begin the process of settling Norman's estate. Simple and straightforward. Everything left to Craig. The house, the savings, the life insurance. It amounted to just under $300,000, carefully saved over a lifetime of modest living. "Your father wanted to make sure you were taken care of," Kenneth said. "He was very proud of you, Craig. Talked about you constantly." That night, Craig sat in his father's house with Liberty curled up on his lap and began the planning phase. He'd spent 2 decades planning military operations. This wouldn't be different. Same principles: intelligence gathering, threat assessment, tactical planning, execution, extraction. But this time, the mission parameters had no official sanction, no oversight, no rules of engagement beyond his own moral compass. And that compass was currently pointing toward a very dark north. Russell A. Bear arrived the next evening, a compact man with a shaved head and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He found Craig in the garage, which had been converted into a makeshift command center. City maps on the wall, photos of the 5 gang members, timelines, known associates, last known addresses. "Jesus," Russell said, taking it all in. "You're not actually—" "The system will fail," Craig interrupted. "Public defenders will plea bargain. Some evidence will get excluded. Maybe 1 or 2 of them do serious time, but not all 5. Knox will definitely walk eventually. His family has money and connections. Within 5 years, most of them will be back on the streets." "You don't know that." "I do. I've seen it 100 times in briefings. The justice system is designed for rehabilitation and due process, which is fine for most crimes. But these men tortured my father to death for entertainment. They filmed it. They laughed about it. And if they walk, they'll do it again to someone else's father, someone else's mother, someone else's child." Russell was quiet for a moment. "What are you planning?" "Justice. Real justice. The kind that ensures they never hurt anyone again." "That's not justice. That's revenge. What's the difference?" Russell couldn't answer that. Instead, he asked, "What do you need from me?" Craig turned to face him fully. "I need you to tell me no. I need you to talk me out of this. I need you to be the voice of reason, because right now all I can hear is my father begging for mercy while those animals laughed." Russell looked at the photos on the wall. Marcus Knox's smirking mugshot. The others standing around like they hadn't just committed murder. "I can't do that, boss. Because if it was my father, I'd already be in a cell, and the bodies would be scattered across 3 states. The fact that you're planning this methodically tells me you're still thinking straight. So no, I'm not going to talk you out of it. I'm going to help you do it right." Craig nodded slowly. "Then we do it smart. Clean. No collateral damage. No innocents caught up in this. And if either of us gets caught, we take full responsibility. We don't take anyone else down with us." "Agreed. Where do we start?" "Intelligence gathering. I need to know everything about these 5 men. Where they live, who they associate with, what they care about, what they fear. I need to understand them completely before we move. I can handle that. Still have contacts in intelligence. And I'm guessing you want this done off the books." "Completely. We never had this conversation. You're here visiting me while I grieve." Russell grinned humorlessly. "Copy that. Give me 48 hours. I'll have enough information to write their biographies." He was good to his word. 2 days later, Russell returned with a thick folder and a flash drive. They spread the contents across the dining room table. Surveillance photos, social media scrapes, criminal records, financial information, known associates, everything. "Marcus Knox is the key," Russell began. "He's the leader, the shot caller. Without him, the others fall apart. Mother's name is Dolores Knox. She's the one with the money. 3 pawn shops, like the detective said, plus a used car lot, and what I suspect is a chop shop operation on the side. She's bailed Marcus out 12 times over the past 8 years. Classic enabler. What about his father? Dead. Killed in a drive-by when Marcus was 10. Gang violence. Marcus watched it happen, which might explain some of his pathology, but I'm not interested in sympathy. Just tactical data. Craig studied Knox's file. He's had a girlfriend? Kara Leach, 23, works as a bartender. Known associate of the gang, but no criminal record herself. From what I can tell, she's not involved in the heavy stuff. Might be genuinely unaware of how deep Knox is in. Next, Raul Costello, second in command. Grew up in foster care, bounced between 12 different homes. No living relatives I can find. His loyalty is to Knox and the gang. They're his family. Dangerous because he's got nothing to lose. Did 3 years in juvie for aggravated assault when he was 16. Beat a teacher unconscious for giving him a failing grade. Mario Dorsey, youngest of 5 brothers, all gang members. 2 are dead. One's in prison for life. One's in hiding from a warrant. Mario's trying to prove himself to Knox. The video was his idea. He's the one who suggested filming it. He wanted to make a name. Ignacio Haney. Comes from money, actually. Parents are both doctors, but they disowned him 3 years ago after he stole their credit cards and ran up 50 grand in charges. He's slumming it with the gang because they accept him. Wants to prove he's hard, but he's really just pathetic. Wade Boyd, recruited into the gang at 14. Barely literate. IQ tested at 78. Follows orders without question because he can't think for himself. He's dangerous the way a loaded gun with no safety is dangerous. Point him in a direction and he'll hurt whatever's there. Craig absorbed all of it, building profiles in his mind. So we've got a narcissistic leader, a loyal lieutenant, an ambitious wannabe, a rich kid playing gangster, and a weapon with no conscience. That's the breakdown. What's the play? We turn them against each other. These men stayed together because they thought they were untouchable. Now, they're facing life in prison, and none of them has ever faced real consequences before. They'll crack under the right pressure. Russell, lean back. You want to break them psychologically first. I want them to experience a fraction of what my father experienced. Fear, helplessness, the understanding that they're at someone else's mercy and that mercy isn't coming. And then we finish it. Over the next month, Craig and Russell became ghosts in Portland. They mapped out the jail's visitation schedules, monitored the defendants' communications through contacts in the system, and tracked every person connected to the 5 gang members. Craig had Russell reach out to former military intelligence operators who transitioned into private security and surveillance. Money changed hands, favors were called in, and slowly a complete picture emerged. Marcus Knox was running operations from inside the jail through his girlfriend Kara. She was passing messages during conjugal visits, coordinating drug deals, keeping the gang functioning. She didn't know about the murder. Knox had told her he was being set up. Raul Costello was becoming increasingly paranoid. He'd gotten into 2 fights with other inmates, convinced they were targeting him for being a cop killer. Prison guards had him on suicide watch. Mario Dorsey was bragging to other inmates about the murder, trying to build his reputation. He'd already been attacked twice by other prisoners who had elderly parents and didn't appreciate someone who'd beat an old man to death. Ignacio Haney was falling apart. His parents had refused to visit or help with legal fees. His public defender was overworked and uninterested. He'd tried to hang himself 3 weeks in, but been cut down by guards. Wade Boyd was exactly where he'd always been, waiting for someone to tell him what to do next. They're vulnerable, Russell observed during one of their nightly planning sessions. All of them. This is when we strike. Not yet, Craig said. The trial needs to happen first. I need to see how the system handles them. If there's any chance of real justice through legal channels, I'll take it. This only happens if the system fails. And if it doesn't fail, then I'll find a way to live with it. But I don't think that's going to happen. The trial began on a cold February morning, for months after Norman Green's death. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. The video played for the jury, many of whom looked away or cried. Medical examiners testified about the brutality of the injuries. Character witnesses described Norman's life and service. The defense had almost nothing to work with. Marcus Knox's lawyer tried to argue that the video was taken out of context, that Norman had provoked them somehow, but it was laughable. How does an 80-year-old man with a cane provoke 5 young men? The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. All 5 defendants. Sentencing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Craig sat in his father's house and waited, hoping that this was enough. That justice through the system would work. That he could walk away and let them rot in prison. Then Aaron Tompkins, the prosecutor, called him. "Commander Green, I wanted to give you a heads up before it becomes public. Marcus Knox's lawyer has filed an appeal based on jury misconduct. One of the jurors apparently discussed the case with her husband before deliberations, which is grounds for a mistrial." Craig's hand tightened on the phone. "Will it work? I don't know. Maybe. The judge might order a retrial. Even if she doesn't, the appeal will drag this out for years. And that's not all. Ignacio Haney's lawyer is filing a motion claiming Haney has developmental disabilities that make him unable to understand the consequences of his actions. Wade Boyd's public defender is using the same argument. If those succeed, they could get significantly reduced sentences or even placement in mental health facilities instead of prison. What about Knox and Costello? They're still looking at life, but with the appeal process, they won't be formally sentenced for at least a year. Maybe longer." Craig thanked him and hung up. He sat in the dark for a long time, petting Liberty, thinking about his father's last moments, about the begging and the laughter, about Jackie Russell's words. The world got a way of balancing the scales eventually. The scales wouldn't balance themselves. It was time to put them right. Russell was waiting at a bar across town, nursing a beer. Craig slid into the booth across from him. "The system's doing what we knew it would," Craig said simply. "Appeals, delays, reduced sentences. They'll be out in 10 years, maybe less. Some might walk completely." Russell nodded. "So we're doing this. We're doing this. But smart, patient, one at a time. And it has to look natural. Accidents, coincidences, nothing that points back to us. I've been thinking about that. These guys have enemies. Other gangs, people they've wronged, even enemies inside the jail. We don't need to pull the trigger ourselves. We just need to put them in position for someone else to do it." Craig considered this. Go on. Mario Dorsey's been bragging inside, making enemies. What if word got out to the Aryan Brotherhood that he was claiming to have killed one of their elderly members? They'd handle it themselves. Except my father wasn't in the Aryan Brotherhood, and we're not involving white supremacists in anything. Fair point. But there are other options. Dorsey's brothers have gang connections. What if his enemies thought he was cooperating with police? Snitching? That's a death sentence in their world. Craig shook his head. Too many variables. We can't control other prisoners or gangs. We need direct action, but with plausible deniability. Then we wait until they're transferred or moved. Prison transports are vulnerable. Accidents happen. They spent the next several hours planning, discarding ideas, refining approaches. By the end of the night, they had the outline of a strategy that was both ruthless and calculated. It would take time, months, maybe longer, but it would work, and it would honor Norman Green in the only way that mattered anymore, by ensuring that the men who killed him never harmed anyone again. Craig stood to leave, but Russell stopped him. "Boss, I need to ask, are you sure about this? Because once we cross this line, there's no going back. We're talking about murder. Multiple murders. Will be exactly what we've spent our careers fighting against." "No," Craig said quietly. "We've spent our careers fighting terrorists and enemy combatants. People who target the innocent. That's exactly what these 5 men are. The only difference is geography." Russell held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay then, let's hunt." The first move came 6 weeks later. Wade Boyd was being transferred from the county jail to the state penitentiary. Standard procedure post-conviction while awaiting sentencing. The transport would take 3 hours, passing through rural areas with limited law enforcement presence. Craig and Russell had spent those 6 weeks preparing. They'd stolen a delivery van, matching the type used by a local catering company. They'd acquired unmarked weapons from a contact in the private security sector, untraceable firearms that had never been registered. They'd mapped every mile of the transport route, identifying the optimal location, a stretch of highway that passed through dense forest, cameras non-existent, traffic minimal. The key was making it look like a gang hit, retaliation for Boyd's cooperation with police. Russell had planted evidence through a compromised corrections officer, documentation suggesting Boyd was talking to prosecutors about other Red Fist operations. Word spread through the prison population quickly. The transport van appeared on schedule, 2 corrections officers in front, Wade Boyd shackled in the back. Craig and Russell followed at a distance in the delivery van, waiting for the right moment. When the transport van reached the isolated stretch, Craig accelerated, pulling alongside. Russell leaned out the passenger window with a police light, the kind unmarked cars use. The corrections officers, thinking they were being pulled over by law enforcement, signaled and pulled onto the shoulder. Craig stopped behind them, both men wearing ski masks now. They approached quickly, weapons drawn. The corrections officers, younger men without combat experience, froze. "Don't be heroes," Craig said, voice disguised with a rasp. "We're not here for you. Open the back." The senior officer, hands shaking, complied. Wade Boyd sat in the rear compartment, chains connecting his ankle shackles to the floor. His eyes went wide with recognition, not of their faces, but of what was about to happen. "Please," he said. "I didn't tell them nothing. I swear. I didn't snitch." Craig pulled Boyd's file from his pocket, the one Russell had compiled. "Wade Boyd, you helped beat Norman Green to death. You held him down while the others kicked him. You filmed part of it. Do you remember that?" Boyd's face went pale. "That wasn't. I was just. Marcus told me to. My father was 80 years old. He had a cane. He begged for mercy. He called for his dead wife. And you laughed. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please, I didn't mean." Craig shot him once in the chest. Clean. Professional. Boyd slumped in his chains, dead in seconds. Russell was already backing toward their van. Craig followed, pausing only to drop a red bandana near the body, the kind rival gangs wore. Make it look like retaliation. They were back on the highway in under 90 seconds. The corrections officers, unharmed but terrified, would report armed men in a delivery van. No license plates, no identifying features. Just another gang hit. 2 weeks later, the news reported Wade Boyd's death as suspected gang retaliation. No arrests made. Investigation ongoing, but with few leads. One down. 4 to go. Mario Dorsey was harder to reach. After Boyd's death, security tightened for all 5 defendants. No more transports without armed guards. Limited movement within the prison. But Dorsey had a weakness, his vanity. He was still bragging, still trying to build his reputation, and that required communication with the outside world. Russell managed to infiltrate the communication chain through Dorsey's girlfriend, Tammy Branch, a woman with her own criminal record and loose loyalty. Money talked, and Russell had plenty of it. Craig's inheritance from Norman, put to use in a way his father never could have imagined. Tammy agreed to pass a message to Dorsey. A rival gang was offering $50,000 for information about Marcus Knox's operations. All Dorsey had to do was meet with their representative during his next legal consultation. It would look legitimate, arranged through his lawyer. Dorsey, greedy and stupid, agreed. The meeting happened in a consultation room at the prison, Dorsey sitting across from a man claiming to be a paralegal. In reality, it was Russell, wearing a perfect disguise, suit, glasses, false identification that would hold up to basic scrutiny. "The information we need is simple," Russell explained, sliding a document across the table. "Knox's supply chain, his distribution network, his protection payoffs. You provide that, you get paid." Dorsey grinned. 50 grand? For that? Man, I can give you his whole operation. Excellent. Let's start with, Russell glanced at his watch. Actually, I need you to sign this non-disclosure agreement first. Legal formality. He handed Dorsey a pen, the same kind used by prison staff and lawyers. Except this one had been modified. The tip contained a hollow needle loaded with a concentrated dose of potassium chloride, enough to cause cardiac arrest within minutes. One press of the button concealed in the pen's clip, and the substance would inject. Dorsey reached for the pen. Russell pressed the button as Dorsey's fingers closed around it. The needle was microscopic, the pain negligible. Dorsey didn't even notice. "Actually," Russell said, standing, "I just realized I left the correct form in my car. Let me grab it real quick. Be right back." He left Dorsey sitting there, waiting. 3 minutes later, Dorsey's heart began to race. For minutes, he was sweating and dizzy. 5 minutes, he collapsed. The guards found him slumped in the chair, dead of apparent heart failure. The autopsy showed cardiac arrest, not unusual for a young man with a history of drug use and poor health. The injection site was too small to detect without specific reason to look for it, and nobody had reason to look. 2 down. Ignacio Haney's death required more patience. His mental health had deteriorated significantly, multiple suicide attempts documented. He was on constant watch, but prison resources were limited. Eventually, there would be a gap in supervision. Craig didn't have to create that gap. He just had to wait for it. It came 6 weeks after Dorsey's death. A guard called in sick, leaving the mental health wing understaffed during a shift change. Haney was left alone in his cell for 23 minutes. He used his bedsheet to hang himself, same method he'd attempted before. This time, nobody cut him down in time. The official report called it suicide, which it was. But Craig and Russell had planted the seed weeks earlier, using Haney's girlfriend to pass messages that made it clear his former friends were talking about him, blaming him, suggesting he should take the fall for everyone. The psychological pressure had pushed him over the edge. 3 down. Raul Costello was the most dangerous target. He was paranoid, violent, and had survived multiple assassination attempts in prison. He trusted nobody, kept to himself, and stayed alert constantly. He was also the one Craig wanted most after Knox. Costello had been the first to punch Norman, starting the attack. But Costello had one vulnerability: his cellmate, a man named Gilberto Booker, serving life for armed robbery. Booker was getting old, tired, and sick. He had stage 4 cancer that the prison medical system was treating with basic pain management and not much else. Russell approached Booker through the same compromised corrections officer. The offer was simple: $200,000 deposited in an account accessible to Booker's daughter, enough to clear her student loans and buy a house. All he had to do was kill Raul Costello and claim self-defense. "Why would I do that?" Booker asked during their meeting. "I'm dying anyway. Money doesn't matter to me." "It matters to your daughter," Russell said. "She's working 3 jobs to pay off debt and rent. She visits you every week, never misses. She deserves better than to spend her life struggling because you made bad choices. This is your chance to leave her something good." Booker considered this. How do I know you'll pay?" "Half up front. $50,000 in her account tomorrow. You can verify it. The rest after the job is done." Booker was quiet for a long time. Then, "What do you need me to do?" "Start a fight. Doesn't matter about what. When the guards come to break it up, make sure Costello has something in his hand. A shank, anything that looks like a weapon. You defend yourself. They'll investigate, but self-defense in prison? That's practically routine." Booker nodded slowly. "Okay, for my daughter. But I need one more thing." "What?" "I want to know why. Why Costello specifically?" Russell pulled out his phone, showed him the video of Norman Green's death. "That's why." Booker watched for 30 seconds, then looked away. "Okay, when do you want it done?" "Whenever the opportunity presents itself. Just make it look natural." It took 3 weeks. Costello had been transferred to Booker's cell after his previous cellmate requested reassignment. The 2 men barely spoke, Costello maintaining his paranoid distance. But on a Tuesday morning during recreation time, Booker approached Costello and quietly insulted his dead father, the one killed in the drive-by years ago. Costello exploded. He grabbed a sharpened piece of metal he'd hidden in his cell and lunged at Booker. The older man, dying but not dead yet, was faster than he looked. He caught Costello's wrist, turned the weapon, and buried it in Costello's throat. Guards arrived to find Booker covered in blood, Costello dying on the floor, and a dozen witnesses who confirmed Costello had attacked first. Self-defense. No charges filed. Gilberto Booker died in the prison infirmary 4 months later. His daughter inherited $200,000 from an anonymous benefactor, never knowing where it came from or why. For down, Marcus Knox was the hardest target and the one Craig wanted most. Knox was smart, connected, and had resources through his mother. He'd been moved to maximum security after the other deaths, recognizing a pattern even if he couldn't identify the source. He communicated through encrypted messages passed via his lawyer, stayed away from other prisoners, and had protection from guards his mother had paid off. But Knox had one overwhelming weakness: arrogance. He still believed he was untouchable, that his money and connections would eventually get him out, that he was smarter than everyone else. Craig was going to use that arrogance to destroy him. The opportunity came during Knox's sentencing hearing. Despite the other deaths, despite the appeals, Knox was finally being formally sentenced. Life without parole, the judge declared. Knox smirked through it all, clearly believing his lawyers would get it overturned. Craig attended the hearing, sitting in the front row where Knox could see him. He wanted Knox to know, wanted him to understand that Norman Green's son had been watching everything, waiting for this moment. After the hearing, as Knox was being led away, Craig stood. Their eyes met across the courtroom. Craig smiled, cold, empty, the smile of a predator who'd cornered his prey. Knox's smirk vanished. For the first time, Craig saw fear in his eyes. Real fear. The understanding that money and connections wouldn't save him. That someone was coming for him, and there was nothing he could do about it. That night, Craig and Russell broke into Dolores Knox's used car lot. Not to steal anything, but to plant evidence. Documents suggesting she'd been laundering money from multiple criminal organizations, paying off judges, bribing police officers. The evidence was manufactured, but perfect, created by Russell's intelligence contacts to be completely believable. An anonymous tip went to the FBI. Within 3 weeks, Dolores Knox was arrested on federal RICO charges. Her assets were frozen. Her businesses shut down. Her lawyers tied up defending her, with nothing left for Marcus. Without his mother's money and influence, Knox was just another prisoner. No special treatment, no protection, no appeals fund. He lasted 6 months before reality broke him. The guards stopped looking the other way. Other prisoners, hearing what he'd done to an elderly veteran, started targeting him. He spent 23 hours a day in solitary, the walls closing in. Craig received word from his contact in the prison system that Knox had tried to hang himself twice, both times failing. The psychological deterioration was complete. Knox was experiencing exactly what Norman Green had experienced in those final moments: helplessness, fear, and the understanding that mercy wasn't coming. But Craig wasn't done. Death would be too easy. He wanted Knox to live, to spend the next 50 years in a cage, watching his mind deteriorate, knowing that he'd never be free, knowing that the son of the man he'd killed had systematically destroyed everything Knox had ever valued. That was justice. 3 years passed. Craig returned to active duty, taking command of a counterterrorism unit operating in Syria. Russell remained his second, and together they completed operations that saved countless lives. The Butcher of Ramadi and the Ghost, hunting monsters in foreign lands just as they'd hunted monsters at home. Catherine Dyer, the detective who'd first informed Craig of his father's death, eventually figured out that the pattern of deaths among the defendants wasn't coincidental. She couldn't prove anything. The evidence was too clean, the methods too professional, but she knew. She visited Craig one final time before his deployment, meeting him at Norman Green's grave. Craig visited every time he was stateside, maintaining his father's tradition of daily conversations. "I can't prove it," she said without preamble, "but I know what you did." Craig continued arranging flowers on the grave. "I don't know what you mean, detective. 4 dead, 1 in a federal prison going insane. All within 2 years. That's not coincidence." The justice system failed, Craig said simply. Men like that always find a way to hurt people, even from inside prison. Maybe someone else decided to stop them. Someone who understood that real justice sometimes requires going outside the law. That's not how justice works. Craig stood, meeting her eyes. Justice is making sure that the people who hurt innocents can never do it again. My father spent his entire life protecting people. He fought in a war, earned medals for valor, came home and spent 60 years being a good man. And he died begging for mercy from animals who filmed it for entertainment. The system gave them trials, due process, constitutional rights. My father got none of that. So yes, detective, someone made sure they paid the price the system couldn't enforce. And I'm not sorry about it. Catherine was quiet for a long time. I should arrest you. You should, but you won't. Because somewhere in that detective's brain, You know they deserved what they got. You've seen too many cases like this, where the system fails and monsters walk free. This time, they didn't walk. This time, the right thing happened. She turned to leave, then paused. Your father would be proud of you. Not for what you did, but for who you are. For becoming the kind of man who stands between the wolves and the sheep. Just don't let the wolves turn you into one of them. They haven't, detective. And they won't. After she left, Craig sat by his father's grave for a long time. Liberty, the stray cat Norman had named, had died peacefully the year before, and Craig had buried her next to his mother's grave. The house had been sold, the money donated to veterans organizations. I kept my promise, Dad, Craig said softly. I fixed it. Not the way you would have wanted, maybe, but the way you taught me. You always said the world needs men who stand between the wolves and the sheep. That's what I did. For you. For Mom. For everyone else they might have hurt. The wind moved through the cemetery, rustling the leaves. Craig imagined it was his father's voice, carried on the breeze, saying what he'd always said after Craig completed a difficult mission. Well done, son. Now come home. But Craig had learned in his 20 years of service that for men like him, there was no permanent home. Only temporary stops between missions. Only brief moments of peace before the next war. He stood, saluted his father's grave, and walked away. There were still monsters in the world that needed hunting. And Craig Green, the butcher of Ramadi, the ghost who'd hunted terrorists across 3 continents, knew exactly how to find them. The debt had been paid. The scales had been balanced. Norman Green could rest now, knowing that his son had honored him in the only way that mattered, by ensuring that the men who killed him experienced justice, even if it came from outside the system. Years later, Craig received a letter from Jackie Russell, his father's friend from Korea. The old man was dying in hospice, but he'd written one final message. Craig, your father once told me that the hardest thing about being a soldier isn't the fighting. It's knowing when to stop fighting. I think you learned that lesson. You did what needed doing, then you came back to yourself. That's the mark of a true warrior. Not the killing, but the restraint afterward. Norman would be proud. I'm proud. Live well, son. Honor his memory not with violence, but with the life you build afterward. Craig kept that letter in his wallet, reading it whenever he needed reminding that he was more than the darkness he'd unleashed, that he was still the man his father had raised, still capable of mercy, compassion, and love. Marcus Knox remained in prison, deteriorating mentally. His mother, Dolores, eventually went to prison herself on the federal charges. The Red Fists gang disbanded after losing their leadership. The streets of Portland became slightly safer. And Craig Green, having paid his father's debt in full, returned to hunting the monsters who threatened the innocent. Not for revenge this time, but for the reason he'd always served, because the world needed men willing to stand between the wolves and the sheep. His father had taught him that, and he'd never forget it. The story ended not with more violence, but with Craig finding peace. He eventually left active duty, took a teaching position at West Point, training the next generation of soldiers. He met a woman named Abby Archer, a fellow veteran who understood the weight he carried. They married, had children, built a life. But every morning, Craig woke early and thought about his father. About the old man who'd survived war and loss and heartbreak, only to die alone on a sidewalk. About the justice that had finally been served, even if it came from outside the law. And every morning, Craig made the same promise, that he'd continue to be the man his father had raised. The man who stood between the wolves and the sheep. The man who protected those who couldn't protect themselves. Not through revenge, not through darkness, but through service, honor, and the unwavering commitment to ensure that good men like Norman Green never died in vain. That was the real victory, not the deaths of 5 gang members, but the life Craig built afterward, the legacy he created, the people he saved and trained and inspired. His father's death had taken something from the world, but Craig had spent the rest of his life giving something back. That was justice. Real, lasting justice. The kind that honored the dead by protecting the living. And in the end, that was enough. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.